All right, folks. Number of primaries took place last night. Nebraska, West Virginia, choosing Democratic and Republican candidates in Nebraska. The guy who Donald Trump wanted, he lost. You also had West Virginia, where you had a person running for Congress there who believed the January 6th and the whole big lie. Well, he won as well. So that's what we expect. Okay, the Republican Party is all about Donald Trump. But what's interesting is when you see all of these different stories that are being done, it's, oh my goodness, what are Democrats going to do about the working class voter? Why are these working class voters, why are they not supporting Democrats? But the working class is. Oh, I'm sorry. But when you say white, well, then that changes the whole conversation. This has been going on for a number of years, and part of it is because media doesn't even want to actually identify white voters. It's as if they just don't have, it's not possible. Author Tim Wise was tweeting about this, and I saw it. He often has talked about this. Of course, he has his book, Dispatches from the Race War, among other books that he has authored. Glad to have him back on the show. So, Tim, this is the thing. It is as if media just cannot say white people. They just can't say it. I mean, excellent as saying black voters and Latino voters and Asian voters. They cannot just say, when they're talking about, when you hear candidates say the working class, they ain't talking about black and brown people.
Right. And it's not just the media. I mean, politicians, including Democratic Party politicians and consultants, have a long history of doing this too, and not just sort of mainstream corporatist Democrats, but Bernie Sanders often conflated the working class with white folks. You know, when he would speak of the working class, and when a lot of folks do, they have this 1930s New Deal labor union imagery of guys on the factory floor or, up 100 stories on the girders building the buildings in New York. The majority of the working class today in 2022 are black and brown, disproportionately women. They are not factory workers. It doesn't look like 50 and 60 years ago. So it's very important for us to specify what we mean. The reason, it's not just an academic point, right? If you define the working class as being the same as white, then it leads to different types of strategies than if you have an understanding that the working class is multicultural and some of it's already with you. The black and brown portion of it definitely overwhelmingly with the Democratic Party, the white portion not, which tells you what? It tells you that the problem isn't a class issue per se, right? That it isn't about, well, you just need to talk about economics more, because clearly black and brown folks are either getting the economic message of Democrats already, that they are, the party that at least is trying to do something for working people, or those black and brown folks realize, well, maybe they're not that great on those issues, but they're better on these things. But either way, what it tells you is a simple, what do they call it, kitchen table issue approach isn't going to get those white voters, because if that's all it took, they'd be there right now with black and brown folks. Just like in 2016 when folks said it's economic anxiety driving people to Donald Trump. If that were true, black folks would have voted for Donald Trump in record numbers because they had the greatest economic anxiety or economic pain, but they didn't. So what is it that white folks aren't getting that black and brown folks are? Or what is it that the Trumpist Republican Party offers to those white people that the Democratic Party doesn't? And the reality is the answer is racial scapegoating. The answer is cultural anxiety. The answer is all this great replacement nonsense. How does the Democratic Party respond to that? You can't respond to it by ignoring it, by acting like, oh, we can't talk about that because they'll call it identity politics. We can't talk about racism. We can't talk about xenophobia. We can. We have to talk about it smart. We have to talk about it the way Ian Haney Lopez, brilliant political scientist, talks about it in his race class narrative project stuff that he's working on right now. You can talk about racism and you can talk about class, but you got to discuss those together, because there's a reason that black and brown working class people can seem to recognize their class interests, and these working class white folks are just voting. They'll tell you. There was a story in the Washington Post a couple years ago. They asked these working class white folks in PA, has Donald Trump brought you new jobs, 2 years in? Had any new jobs, any new factories? And these Pennsylvania white folks in central PA were like, nah,
but he really stuck it to those ball players. When they took a knee, he really stuck it to them. They're not voting on their health care. They're not voting on their wages. They're not voting on the quality of their schools. They're voting on how can we blame black and brown people for the mess that we're in. And the Democratic Party better figure out how to respond to that scapegoating other than saying, well, if you vote for us, we'll get you broadband internet.
Right.
Nobody's here.
And this is precisely, I mean, what you just laid out is literally, my book drops in September. It's called White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. And that's really what this is all about. It is not about, the money. Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton by 450,000 votes in 2016 because he was against NAFTA. So all of those workers who would say they were losing their jobs because of NAFTA. Okay, but then you come back in 2020 and then he wins it again, and you got all of these are labor workers. These are people who supposedly about unions, and they're voting against the guy. They're voting with the guy in the party that hates unions.
Right.
Except police and fire unions.
Right. The only piece of legislative success that Donald Trump had as president, the only thing he really accomplished that wasn't some random executive order, which was usually about a culture war subject, or the courts, packing the courts, was what? A tax cut for incredibly wealthy individuals and corporations. It wasn't a tax cut for working class people whose taxes have either remained flat or in some cases gone up over the last several years, but they still voted for him. So it's very obvious that it isn't that. That's not to say Democrats shouldn't talk about economic issues. They absolutely should, but they should be talking about it in a way that says, there's a reason that we don't have good, universal, affordable health care for everyone. You know what the reason is? Because they keep telling you that if you get that, those brown people are going to cheat the system. Those brown people are going to take advantage. That's what they're being told. We need to actually be pointing out the scapegoating and saying the reason we can't have nice things is because these folks over here are lying to you about who's to blame for the fact that you ain't got nice things already. So we have to talk. Yeah, it's fine to blame people for stuff, but the wrong people are being blamed. And it's incumbent upon the Democrats to say this is a game that's being played on you. This is what Lopez and others are talking about in their work, is to say, listen, it's not that we're calling you racist. You're not a bunch of awful, horrible people. We know there are certainly some among, the insurrectionist class of the Republican voters who are. But it's not about you being bad people. It's about you being people who are being sold a bill of goods. It's like if Penn and Teller, were the president, these master illusionists, right? And Penn or Teller or both as a combo up there with one hand trying to distract you over here while they're doing something else over here like any good magician does. That's what the Republican Party and the right has been doing. And 30 years ago, when I started doing this work in Louisiana against David Duke, we said at the time, Duke lost those elections, lifelong white supremacist, former Klan leader, but he got 6 out of 10 white people to vote for him in the Senate race in 1990. And we said at the time, y'all think this is just Louisiana. Y'all think this is a Southern thing. And but my boss at the time, a guy by the name of Lance Hill, said, David Duke politics is like cocaine. It is, first off, it's white, but it's also easily concealable and transportable across state lines. And 30 years later, the politics of racial scapegoating that David Duke was working on at that time didn't quite work yet, but it worked with 6 out of 10 white folks. And now it is what MAGA Trumpist Republicanism is. It's about saying you're in pain, you're struggling, you're afraid, and these are the sources of your anxiety, of your problems, of your fears. We can just control those people, your life will be better. The Democrats have got to take that on frontally. They can't just dance around it.
And take it on front, directly, I think is important. He's a perfect example. I remember when in the last election, Senator Bernie Sanders kept talking about the working class, and he kept talking about identity politics. And I sent one of his people a text message saying, I said, if Bernie Sanders talks about this one more time, I'm going to bust his ass publicly. And so one of his guys was like, so he sets a meeting up with me and Senator Sanders. So I meet him in his office. I tell him point blank, I said, man, don't you understand that when you're talking about identity politics, you're frankly speaking the language of the right? And I said, and I'm telling you, I said, that's what they were saying about John Lewis and the SNCC workers and black people. When you're fighting for civil rights, identity politics. I said, so you better be damn careful. I told him point blank. And I said, Senator Sanders, you need to be going talking to white people about identity politics. I said the same thing to Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I'm like, y'all gonna talk about it to white people. And so but here's another example. So President Joe Biden and his team dropped this video today when he met with Chris Smalls and the Amazon workers out of New York. So watch this.
You're in trouble, man. You're my kind of trouble. Congratulations, man. I got in a little trouble by it. You may recall I was saying I'm looking forward to them being organized.
Yeah, well,
but you got it done in one place.
Yeah.
Let's not stop.
That's right.
All right, and that's great. He met with Chris Small and those workers. But Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz Theo Harris of the Poor People's Campaign, they have been trying for more than a year to sit down, have a meeting with President Biden and Vice President Harris, to not just with those two, but with actual poor and low-wage workers, people that I had on the show last week. And the White House and his team have refused to actually schedule a meeting. Now, they're coming here June 18th, and I'm sitting here going, a third of all voters in America are poor and low-wage workers. Hello, if you want to win in November, how about you meet with them? Not just folks who got, and again, the work that they did getting that union at the Amazon place in New York, that's great. But what the hell is taking so long? The GOP ain't gonna meet with them.
Right. Well, my guess is that there's a willingness, and again, all credit due to that union work that they've been doing there. It's fantastic. We've seen the same kind of thing happening at Starbucks. We're seeing it at Amazon. We're seeing a lot of really amazing labor work. Point being, disproportionately being led by black and brown workers. Very important to point that out, right? Again, the working class, very different than what it is in sort of the Bernie Sanders 1930s factory floor, New Deal kind of imagery. So it's great what they're doing, but the problem with that is, I think, at least in part, the willingness to meet with the Amazon folk is, Amazon's easy to beat up on. The right doesn't like Amazon because it's Jeff Bezos and he owns the Post. Right. And he's looked at as a liberal. So I think they feel that that's safe. Well, we can meet with the people that are unionizing Amazon because sort of everybody hates Amazon for different reasons. Right. Like the left feels this way about them. The right feels this way about them. But if you meet with Reverend Barber, that's different. If you meet with poor folks and working class folks more broadly, not just in one particular company that it's easy to beat up on, then that's going to send a more dangerous message. They better wake up from that. And they better start to realize that unless they are prepared to talk about the intersection of issues of race and class and gender, because now this attack on reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy, it's all part of the same thing. The key message that Democrats never seem to get, and that people on the left forget, the main difference between right and left, it has nothing to do with how much government you support, has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with whether you support traditional hierarchy or whether you support challenging traditional hierarchy, which means if you're on the right, you believe white authority, male authority, straight authority, etc., right on down the line, is what needs to be in charge because those are the better people. So that explains why you're going to defend an electoral college system that enshrines permanent minority rule. That explains why you want to restrict voting because you don't think certain people should be voting anyway. That's the reason you want to restrict women's reproductive autonomy because they're just women and they shouldn't make those decisions for themselves anyway. That's why you want to get critical race theory or just accurate history out of the classroom because that empowers the voice of non-traditional leaders, right? We don't want to hear their voices. That's why you want to get rid of any discussion of LGBTQ folk because you want to restore straight supremacy and Christian hegemony. So we need to be talking about it this way. If you like traditional authority and you think that works well for you, by all means, you should be a Republican. But if you're poor, if you're working class, if you're struggling to put your kid through college or pay for your health care, then by definition, traditional authority ain't working for you. Right. So even if you have a disagreement with certain people in the left or progressive coalition about some issue that touches on something that you care about religiously or whatever else, like you need to remember traditional hierarchy has never worked for poor people. Traditional hierarchy has never worked for working class people. Traditional hierarchy works for itself. And the Republican Party is supporting all of those traditional hierarchies. And the Democrats need to be speaking about that as a problem, right? That traditional authority and traditional hierarchy hadn't been serving us very well. And I think they're afraid to do that because, again, so much of their money comes from wealthy folks. And so, they've sort of thrown in with a lot of corporate folks over the years, and that's gotten them in trouble and made it very difficult for them to bring this message. But they better do it, because that's what really separates the two sides, is essentially whose side are you on, the top or the bottom, right? And the bottom, whether it's a race hierarchy, a class hierarchy, a gender hierarchy, a sexual hierarchy, a religious hierarchy, the bottom, right, is getting shafted every single time that we continue to return those people to power.
Tanya, question or comment?
I agree with Professor Wise. We need to highlight that the shared experience of all of those folks at the bottom is, a lack of resources, a lack of health care, a lack of a livable wage, and focus on what is not happening because white, straight, male, educated folks are in charge. Part of the reason that they don't refer to Black people when they're referring to the working class is because they don't want to refer to Black and brown folks as working. Exactly. Right? That challenges this whole idea that we're just sucking off of the system. And, right. I agree that the Democrats need to have a better strategy. We can't just say we're not them. We need to point out some realities. The realities exist. We just need to point out who's responsible for them.
Right. Monique?
No, I mean, I appreciate everything that you do, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really do believe that there's a way, though, for us to accentuate the things that the administration is doing while doing the course correction on others. So, for instance, I know that high-speed internet connection is a big deal. And it may be a hard sell for people to understand that some people can get on a million Zoom meetings easily. Some can't. Some students are able to do their homework at home. Some have to do it in a parking lot outside of Starbucks because they have the Chromebook the school gave them, but no Wi-Fi. And these gaps are poverty gaps. They are race gaps. And so I am thankful that that's part of a bipartisan infrastructure plan. And I just wonder whether the issue isn't that the Biden administration does not care about the right things and isn't trying to do the right things as much as it is people don't know the things that they're doing.
No, I actually don't think that's what
I was asking Tim.
No, actually, but it's my show and I'm gonna respond. Okay. I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna jump in here, and then Tim is gonna respond as well. Here's, to me, is a fundamental problem. Okay, it's not that folks don't care. You gotta tell white people directly, hey, we got you this and they didn't. That's part of the deal. So what Tim is laying out here is that you have Republicans who are gonna claim they did all these great things. They don't care about you. We're the party of the working class. We believe in populism. And then what Biden does, he makes an announcement, but what he's not doing is going directly to those white voters in the rural places. In the last election, Tim, Tom Tillis was sitting here polling around 16, 18% among African Americans. How? This man was the architect of voter suppression, voter ID in North Carolina. You know why? Because Dems were not actually talking to rural Black people. Part of the thing is when I see Democrats having these conversations about broadband in rural America, they're talking to suburban America. You gotta go where the broke white people are.
Well, that's part of it. But let me also say this. Look, I know consultants don't like to hear this, and a lot of people in the party don't like to hear this. And the Jim Carvilles of the world, who were locked in a paradigm that's 30 years old and was barely true then, don't like to hear it. But the idea that in the 21st century, voters are making decisions on bread and butter pocketbook issues, principally when they are white. Now, black and brown folk, I think, are, and I think the truly broke, hardcore, hard scrabble, quote unquote, working class do. But, you know, let's be clear. The white folks that are the biggest problem are sort of that upper working, lower middle, sort of anxious middle. These are not the January 6th insurrectionists were not a bunch of rural working class people. They were white folks with incomes at or above the median, often 10, 20,000 above the median in this country. They were disproportionate. The one thing that linked them was coming from communities where there had been an uptick in the number of brown people or black people. That was the number one determiner of whether a geographic locale sent insurrectionists to the Capitol. It wasn't their economic position. It wasn't if they had internet or not. It wasn't if they had good health care. It wasn't if their wages had gone down. It wasn't gas prices. It wasn't any of that. It was, are there more brown people here than there were in 2012? And if the answer was yes by a significant number, that is what predicted insurrection. So we can talk about all these things as good policy. ACA was good, inadequate, but good policy. Broadband internet, good policy. But as a political sales tool, I know of zero evidence that says anyone is going to go to the polls and vote for a Democrat who wasn't already likely to do that because of broadband internet. I don't know of any evidence. If there is research that says this moves the needle, then it needs to be presented, because I've looked for it. I can't find it. Partisanship is overwhelmingly negative right now, which means we have got to talk about really big issues, and we've got to enter into that culture war. You can't skip around the culture war. You have to point out that the culture war is a distraction. You have to call it what it is. It is a scapegoating tactic used by magicians to keep you from realizing what they're actually doing. And the good thing about that approach is it's, you know, a lot of people like the Bernie Sanderses of the world want to beat up on the millionaires and the billionaires. Nobody cares about the millionaires and the billionaires except for the fact that they're not won yet. Right. So I mean, I happen to think that those are fine targets, but your average white dude out there does not care. What he will beat up on is a politician or a media person because they don't trust them. So the argument should be these politicians and these media folk are leading you astray, making you fear brown people, making you angry at black ball players, making you angry at whatever. Right. Thinking that they're the reason that your life sucks. And the reality is they're the reason that your life sucks. Those politicians and those media folks that don't want to tell you the truth. Anybody can be steered to that a lot easier than they can be like, you know, I mean, I don't happen to like Elon Musk, but most people, for whatever reason, think he's a genius because he wants to colonize Mars and buy everything. Like, so you can beat up on Musk. I think that's fun, but it's not going to work the way it would if we would talk about politicians scapegoating, politicians distracting us. Right, as opposed to sort of an old school class politics, which just says it's about, you know, like the elite versus everyone else. That's an important message. But I just don't think that works right now. And I don't think this look at all we've done for you thing works right now, because folks are in a mode where they are going to focus on this sense of loss. The research on this says that people are far more likely to mobilize politically to defend against loss than they are to gain something. So if the Democrats say, if you vote for us, you'll get X, Y, or Z, but the other side says, if you don't vote for us, they'll take X, Y, and Z from you, Republicans win every time. The idea that you can get them to mobilize because they'll get this job or this wage or Green New Deal or whatever doesn't work. No evidence says it works. People mobilize to defend against the thing they already have. And that's what they're being told is being taken by immigrants, taken by affirmative action, taken by people, you know, using up taxpayer dollars, taken by the LGBTQ folks who are trying to recruit their kids. That is the threat mechanism and the threat mobilization that the Democrats have not figured out how to respond to. And so it's about the Democrats saying, no, you're right. You're in real danger. Right. People are, in fact, trying to hurt you, but it's not them. Right. The people that are trying to hurt you are these other folks over here. And they're doing it while distracting you with all these shiny baubles that, you know, get your attention.
Scott.
Yeah, you know, this is a lot to unpack, Professor. I don't disagree with anything you've said. I would offer a friendly amendment that really has no resolution, and that is this. How do you get, if the Democrats do everything that you say they should be doing, messaging or otherwise, there's a big gap there in whether you can convince white folks who are Trumpsters to believe the Democrats. and to believe that it's worth trusting them when they are the party of black and brown and gay folks. I think it comes down to race, period. And I know you say it a lot of different ways, but fundamentally it may be cultural, but it's rooted in race and white people not wanting to be affiliated. And I think you said this in regard to the Democratic Party and what they represent. I use for an example the ACA, right? Obamacare, if you will. It helped insure 50 million people, majority of them poor and white, I would argue. And yet they would say they would never vote for Obama, but it gave them health care. And so Democrats went to them and said, this is the health care that you're receiving right now from Obama. And those 10 poor states that are in the South that get more federal aid than ever, they're still voting for Republicans who are against entitlements. They voted against Barack Obama, even though he gave them health care, and the messaging was clear to them that this came from Obamacare. They rejected Obamacare and said, but I want American Health Care Act.
No, they didn't.
So I think race plays a powerful piece in this, and convincing white people to come back to the Democratic Party or to do away with or walk away from the Republican Party, it's less academic than that. How do you get through to them to convince them to say yes, as opposed to fixing the messaging that probably won't work because Republicans are so much better at it.
But Scott, here's one thing. But here's one thing though they didn't do. What you just described, they actually didn't do. They literally did not. They literally did not go to the brokest, whitest parts of the country and say, "Hey, Affordable Care Act. Oh, you don't like Obamacare? It's the same thing. Oh, by the way, I passed it for you. Do you know why, Mississippi?"
I think they did.
No, they didn't, Scott.
You don't think they did?
Scott, they didn't. Scott, I was sitting in the White House. I told Obama directly, why do you keep going to Virginia and Ohio and the suburbs talking about the Affordable Care Act? Go to the reddest, whitest, brokest, sickest parts of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and take them on. Well, you know, they were like coming up with whatever the hell. And so what they did was, you gotta go to somebody and say, guess what? Your senator voted against your issues when it comes to heart disease, your issues when it comes to opioids, your issues. They don't do that. What they do is they simply go through this deal of like, hey, we're the better ones, not them. If you're gonna be in a fight, be in the fight. Swing.
Let me tell you what.
Tim, go ahead.
Let me tell you what they should have done from the start. One of the reasons that they probably didn't try that in certain states, particularly in some of those southern states, is that, as we know, and I live in Tennessee, so this happened here, the legislature in a lot of our states undercut ACA because the Supreme Court said they could when the Supreme Court did not require the expansion of Medicaid. Right? It allowed states like mine to not expand it because they were trying to kick the legs out from under ACA anyway, right? And they did. They limited how much it could benefit people in a lot of states. And so a lot of the people in those red states didn't reap the benefits the way they did in Connecticut and California and other places. So what they should have done, I think first thing Biden should have done or anybody should do now is say, listen, those of y'all that are in those states where your Republican legislatures undermined your health care, we're going to make sure that we're going to expand coverage for you right now. We're going to push through huge subsidies specifically directed at you, at your states, because your Republican lawmakers undermined your ability to benefit from this thing. It's not we tried. You know, this is what here's what we passed, here's what we supported, and it was y'all's state. And the reason that's important is not only might that get some people to recognize who benefits them and who doesn't, but it also raises the question at the state level where Democrats are playing from so far behind. You got all these legislatures that are super majority Republicans because people think that their interests are being served. They need to be reminded the reason that their health care sucks, if it sucks here in Tennessee, is because of what the GOP did. Boom. Not what Obama did. They tried. But the GOP made it impossible for that bill to benefit you the way it was intended. That should have been the message. And I haven't heard that message from anyone in this.
Tim, the evidence of what you just said is what happened in North Carolina. All of these white people were initially against Moral Mondays and against what the NAACP and Barbara was doing. And all of a sudden, those white folks said, damn it, Our rural hospitals are closing. And Reverend William Barber told me there was a parade in North Carolina and a white guy draped in the Confederate flag walked up to him with tears in his eyes and say, "You and I don't agree on much." He said, "But thank you for fighting for our hospitals." And so in North Carolina, the reason they have been able, why Democrats have a majority on the state Supreme Court, which overturned many different things. Why does a Democratic governor? Why? Because what they did was they talked about the very issues of broke white people and said, those are the people who are screwing you. And they explained to them how they were getting screwed. And that's why when I spoke to the North Carolina NAACP, I ran into these white women who were the founders of an NAACP chapter in the mountains of North Carolina. And they said, ain't nothing but broke white people around us. And we are running the NAACP chapter because they hit the issues. All I'm simply saying is, and the thing is this here, Scott, you ain't going to flip the MAGA people. That's not the point. The point is you go after the people who ain't voting. The largest group of people to win are the people that Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign are targeting. And all I'm saying is that's a lot of white working class people. That's who they've been mobilizing in West Virginia. We told you, it was a white woman who watched this show, ain't never heard of Reverend Barber, was watching this show, saw him, and then she volunteered, and now she's a co-chair of the West Virginia Poor People's Campaign. So white folks can be reached, but somebody got to actually talk directly to them in a way they get it. And unfortunately, to Tim's point, Democrats are depending on a bunch of well-paid D.C., New York, California strategists who ain't trying to talk to broke white people.
Right. Or acknowledge any of the race stuff at all. And that's a long-standing thing, by the way. I mean, even when we did the work against Duke, we had high-paid consultants. Mark Penn was one of them, and he's still doing his thing. Where he was telling us at the time that we shouldn't talk about David Duke being a racist because, we got to have racists vote against him too, where he's going to win. They were saying we shouldn't talk about him being a Nazi, shouldn't talk about him being an overt white supremacist. We should just talk about the fact that he didn't pay his taxes or something, or that he dodged the draft in Vietnam or something, or, whatever, like anything but race. This aversion to discussing how racism is used as a weapon is a white, upper middle class and affluent consultant disease that has never served progressives very well. And because that kind of skittishness, that unwillingness to say, this is what they're doing to you. Even we've talked about this before, Roland, that back in 2016, the biggest mistake Hillary Clinton made rhetorically when she said the thing about deplorables, the mistake there wasn't that there aren't some people like that. We saw them on January 6th, right? But the far better message, think about what happened if she had said, you know what? I don't think you're deplorable, but that guy does, because he thinks all he's got to do is talk about Mexican rapists and drug dealers and you'll roll over for him. He thinks you're a racist. He thinks you're a bigot. He thinks you're such a bigot that all he's got to do is like wave this flag about black people and brown people and quote unquote shithole countries or whatever, right? All he's got to do is talk about those folks and you'll buy it. And I believe in you. I trust in you. I think you're smarter than that. That would have been a far different message, right? Because that wouldn't have been beating up the voters. That would have been saying, you see that dude? You see what he's doing? You see what he's trying to do to you? You're smarter than that. And then some of those voters would have still fallen for it, but some of them would have been, oh yeah, look at what that jackass is trying to do. He's trying to con me. He's just like the rest of them, right? So this is the difference between sort of mainstream consultancy and mainstream party folk and like understanding the way that race is weaponized and has been weaponized and what it's going to take to de-weaponize it in this country. And I'm telling you, we got 1 million people that have died from COVID. A lot of white folks have buried their grandparents and their older parents because early on when the numbers showed it was black and brown folk doing the dying, a lot of white folks took this not seriously. We know that from the data now. We know that from several academic studies that white folks got nonchalant because, it's just those black folk over there doing the dying, and then wait around 8 months and it was us, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can start to talk to white folks about how their indifference to black and brown suffering ends up coming back to hurt them.
Yep.
And listening to the siren song of this culture war stuff comes back to hurt them. But I just don't hear any of that at the national level from the party or from mainstream politicians. I hear it from folks like Reverend Barber and Ian Haney Lopez and others that are doing that work on the ground. but I just don't hear it from the top. And that's what it's going to take in the midterms and in a couple of years in 24.
Well, we'll see if they actually do any of that. Can't say they didn't hear it, because we talk about it all the time. Tim Wise, certainly glad to have you on the show. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?